Thank you. And what I will say will be some personal reflections of the time I spent in Sierra Leone to complement some of the other things you've just heard and maybe reinforce some of them. And just to start with, I'd just like to pay tribute to the incredible work that MSF did in the whole region, and certainly my experience in Sierra Leone is that we would have been very, very stuck without them. So, just briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the context from my perspective when I took over, a little bit about the role of a bilateral donor leading a response. I want to focus a little bit on the district level and just some lessons which I'm sure we could spend forever talking about. So I won't spend long on this, but in terms of Sierra Leone, I think you're all aware of the enormity. When I took over, it was just starting to really take off in Sierra Leone. We reached a peak of about 500 plus a week in November, and as I think many of you know, last week we were at 15. So I took over towards the end of September, just as it was really taking off. What I show here are the planning assumptions that I came in with on the modelling, and the thing that looks a bit like an insect going along is actually what actually happened. So I took over somewhere around the 22nd of September, where we were confronted with a situation which could have got totally out of control, and many worst case predictions, including the worries of regional spread and obviously global spread. And some of the things for me to remember is, this was not a normal humanitarian emergency, and I'll come on to that into the lessons learned, because I think we've got a long way to go in that area. And obviously it was an unprecedented outbreak, and there was obviously a failure to act by the international community early enough, and an urgent need for a quick response once the international community reacted. I think the only other thing I'd say on context for Sierra Leone was, from the UK perspective, we obviously had a unique relationship with Sierra Leone. We had been working there for a number of years, and particularly following the Civil War, and had a very close relationship with a number of the government structures in Sierra Leone, not least the military, which actually had an impact on how we responded. So I was sent out to head up what was known as the UK Joint Interagency Task Force, which was the first time in the UK response that we had put our military colleagues under a civilian lead. It soon became known as the Combined Interagency Task Force, because we were joined by a number of other countries supporting us: Canada, Australia, South Korea, Norway, Denmark, and others. And we were the lead bilateral donor there in Sierra Leone. We've spent to date about £430 million as part of our response, and a key partner for us when I came in was UNMIR, as they were setting up. And so one of my first key challenges was how to ensure we got a coordinated response between UNMIR, the UN system, the UK, and obviously other partners. It was fairly evident early on that one of the missing aspects was what we call command and control. There was little coordination on the ground between all the actors, many competing interests, and at the stage I arrived, there was little of the instruments we needed to defeat the disease, whether it's laboratories, treatment centres, etc. But initially, the one thing we could do was try and actually start getting some coordination and making sure that the different bits started to join up, even with what we had. And two things that happened was setting up a National Ebola Response Centre to try and get an overall coordination mechanism, because it was clear that the response that was needed was much bigger than the Ministry of Health itself could do. So how did you actually get this overall coordination? And then setting up, as we learned by doing, it was clear that actually the majority response had to happen at district level, and so moving on and setting up district response centres to try and improve coordination and ensure that the focus was there and not stuck at a central level. So this was a sort of basic strategy when I took over, which is round the box on the left-hand side, which was really to just try and get on top of the exponential increase on the outbreak over the first 3 months. And it was a fairly simple strategy that we were all trying to work to, which is really identify and isolate and treat the living and safely bury the dead while keeping health workers and others safe. And obviously, a key aspect of this was to try and ensure that we could get Freetown under control, because it was about a third of the population there, and obviously was the nerve centre for government and much of the response. And when I arrived, there were one of the first things to confront you was the fact that dead bodies were just not being picked up for 4 or 5 days. And that was one of the first things we tried to do through the command and control. So what did the UK actually do? Well, we supported 6 ETUs, we supported a number of our partners to get up and running the burial teams, training staff on a massive scale, setting up the labs. The labs were one of, I think, the key things which I think we all underestimated. It seems fairly simple looking back at it, but when it was taking 3, 4, 5 days to turn around a sample, that was 3, 4, 5 days where people were not being diagnosed, and if 70 or 80% of those cases were negative, it was actually probably some of the most dangerous times for them. And then the other aspect we did was spend a lot of time supporting setting up the National Ebola Response Centre and the district ones, and particularly in that context was using our strong connections with the Sierra Leonean military to actually get the backbone for the command and control centres in place early on. In our view, they were probably the only aspect of the Sierra Leonean government that had the capacity at the time to be able to set up the command and control and really put in a backbone in there. And obviously, we've heard a bit already about the importance of community mobilization, and I would say that was key. We supported a network of NGOs and others to try and get that going. But I think the one thing we really missed was some of the UN coordination mechanisms, particularly around humanitarian emergencies, and I would say in that context, OSHA would have been key. So just looking at the district response, as I say, it was clear to me early on that the only way we was going to beat this was decentralize the response to district level and get the coordination going locally. It was also clear that I heard a lot of people kept talking about health systems collapse. I'm not sure personally I believe that the health system collapsed. I think it's much more nuanced than that, and I think the health system was not either able or willing to respond in many cases. And I think what you found when we worked at district level was we got a much better response, and the districts were often lacking in support and resources because much of it was focused at the central level. And when they did get down to the districts, you actually did see the districts respond. So there, you see many curves, many modelling of this. I mean, I think what was interesting was when I came in, the modelling that we had been doing indicated that we would bend the curve somewhere around the end of December, and actually that was what happened. I'm not sure that any of us know exactly what led to that reduction and how much you can put on to safe burials, how much you can put on to the treatment units, the labs. I think it was, for me, it was a combination of everything, and particularly, I think, making sure we got the response down to district level. And obviously, it's still going, getting to zero. And I think certainly in the Sierra Leone context, I mean, we've always talked about a long, bumpy tail, and that's what we're experiencing. I think this slide just shows the complexity of actually just trying to follow transmission chains and do the contact tracing. This is one from Port Loco. And you only have to miss, and this is what we're seeing at the moment, you only have to miss one person or one person disappears, and you set up a whole new chain. And that's what's key at the moment. It goes back to what we've just heard from the previous presenter about ensuring that you've really got the community engagement and mobilization, because actually you will only stop this at community level. You can provide the support structures from government, from partners, from NGOs, from international, but actually it will be win or loss by actually how engaged and how much ownership and responsibility the communities take. So what did we learn? Many, many lessons. And I think for me, some of the key ones were obviously the importance of a quick response. The system did not respond as we needed to. We need to make sure that in the future that does not happen. And part of that quick response for me is actually about making sure that moving forward we really join up the humanitarian and the health silos, as I call them. I still don't think enough has been done to join it up and looking at the comparative advantage of both and ensuring that they can respond together rather than separately. Another bit of it is that actually, I think for us in Sierra Leone context, certainly in the early stages, there was a lot of advantage of actually including the military, both the UK and the Sierra Leonean, to really get the response up and running. They have, it's not a sort of panacea in every environment, but it certainly worked there. And I think how we create more of a civilian or a sort of a military civilian emergency capacity, as we see in many Western countries when we have, floods, disasters, and other things, how we get that going as part of our overall response. I think another lesson was that there was a real lack of partners, particularly in Sierra Leone. Liberia was about 6 weeks to 2 months ahead of Sierra Leone. So by the time I arrived in Sierra Leone, many of our traditional partners were fully stretched, not only dealing with the response in Liberia, but at the same time dealing with the responses in Iraq and elsewhere. So how do we get more partners to be able to engage in these sort of complex humanitarian emergencies? How do we, a number of our responders ended up being development partners that moved into the humanitarian space. How do we build on that for the future and ensure that we do have that capacity? And I think the other thing is ensuring that the context at district level, that you tailor your approaches right down, because no one size fits all. And then I think for me, a key lesson looking back is how we can ensure that the importance of some of the humanitarian, the UN humanitarian area actors like OCHA are there from the beginning. The response in Sierra Leone and my part in it suffered very much from that lack of coordination, information that someone like OCHA could have done. We spent a lot of time dealing with multiple information sources, which we should have been able to cut through. So I think with that, I will close. But as I say, I think we could talk about lessons for the rest of the day. Thank you.